But yeah, I mean, there's many stories like that of guys who sound like Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink mix into one and they're dead within a week
Mm.
because you're not really addressing the issues that you need to address. You know that responsibility matters. You know you want your life to get better, but that doesn't mean it's psychological change. You have to look at your unconscious issues that affect you, regardless of what you want, regardless of what you think you care about.
All right, welcome to Reason and Reverence. I am your host, Connor O'Leary, and today I'm with Mark Derian, who I've had on the show before. Mark is a therapist based out of Los Angeles, and of course, I have Taff. I think this is your third time now, uh, second time co-hosting. And today, as you might have guessed, we're going to talk about therapy. Now, therapy is a much discussed, highly contentious topic now in our culture. It feels like almost everyone that I know is in therapy or has been in therapy. Lots of people now will tell you you need to be in therapy. Everyone should be in therapy. I think it's something that, women like to put on their Hinge profiles, like, it's a green flag if you're in therapy, or I won't date you unless you're in therapy. Um, and and our culture is filled with what people call now therapy speak, which are these terms that people get from therapy. So our culture is very much therapy saturated right now. And yet it seems like our mental health is getting worse. It actually feels like it's getting worse. And there are some statistics that suggest that. In fact, there are even statistics that suggest that going through, or there are studies that suggest that going through a course of therapy does actually make your mental health worse. So what's going on here? Why are we all obsessed with therapy? Why does our mental health seem to be getting worse in spite of it as a culture? What's wrong with therapy? And that is one of the questions we're going to talk about today, because Mark has answers to this question. In fact, he just wrote a whole book on therapy, on the fundamental principles of therapy, laying out what those fundamental principles are and why most modern therapeutic approaches, or perhaps all, except his, I'm not sure, uh, are wrong and ineffective. And his book is called The Therapy Manifesto. And so, welcome on, Mark. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Connor. Good to be here. Just to be clear, I don't think everybody else is wrong except me.
Okay, yeah, I put a caveat there. I put a caveat there.
I'm kooky enough. We don't want to start out with that idea. No, I mean other people have good ideas too, but my point is, look, here's what therapy is, here's what it isn't, and if you're not getting anywhere in therapy, it's because you're not actually practicing what it is. And I think a lot of therapists get good thing, they get things right, but they get a lot of things wrong too. And I'm just really pointing out and integrating what everybody gets right.
Well, I think that's a good place to start. What is therapy in your mind? How do you define
It's a process of uncovering your unconscious issues that affect your conscious behavior. I mean, this is best done with a therapist. Usually, when people say, "What was I watching yesterday?" Oh yeah, King of the Hill. I don't know if you guys
it?
are
Mm.
watching King of the Hill, but they're making jokes about how like everybody is a therapist now, or my my girlfriend's my therapist, or my dog's my therapist,
My
things
computer.
like that. Yeah, yeah, my ChatGPT is my therapist, which I do think
It's
there's
written that
some
there.
there's potential relevance there to ChatGPT or any AI being a therapist. Potentially needs to be used in the right way, but
So you're maybe a little bit more optimistic than most people are about that.
about ChatGPT or about AI in general.
About its potential for therapy. I know I've seen other therapists express optimism about it, but I think culturally there's a lot of negative sentiment. So it's interesting to hear that you might see a bit of a silver lining there.
Well, you as the client need to know exactly what you're doing going into AI therapy, and I think a lot of people don't. So yeah, when most
Mm.
people use ChatGPT for a therapist, it's probably going to be really bad, and it's going to just end up reinforcing all their delusions they have and all their projections. But I think if you go in there with the right orientation, then then it's a real chance for possibility. I mean, that's what the manifesto is about. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not really written for therapists, it's written for the clients of therapy. I mean, that was really important to do. I mean, it's something that therapists could read and get something out of and learn something about therapy. I want that too, but really it's just for the individual client. Like what is therapy? How do you go about it? What do you need to talk about? How to talk about it? So yeah, that's the idea. Sorry, what was your question, Connor?
Well, I didn't have a specific question for you. I was just
Okay.
introducing the book there, but I do have, one of the questions which I think a lot of people will be interested in is, before we get into the meat of exactly what your ideas are, what the things you lay out in this book, how did you? Because you have uh, uh, I think a very clear, very systematic approach to therapy, which is unusual. Outside of something like CBT. Um, And I'm curious what's the origin story? How did you end up writing this book? Like how did you end up at these principles?
Well, in grad school, I wrote a my dissertation, which was never fully accepted, or I mean, I was kicked out of grad school, but I wrote it.
Well,
It was, yeah,
you were kicked out of Columbia.
right, yeah.
I just want people to know you were kicked out of a prestigious school.
Right.
Yeah.
You had to brag a little.
You weren't kicked
Thanks.
out of a community college.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't bring that up because it just sounds kind of douchey to like I think I come off as douche enough. I don't have to play it up, right? Um,
That's why you
so
have
yeah, I was
co-hosts
kicked
on the
out of school.
podcast.
I'm sorry.
That's why you have co-hosts. We can play it up. We can be douchey for you. So you get to look good.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I need co-douches. Um, spread out the douchiness. Uh, yeah. Um, yeah, so I wrote this dissertation. It was just about the integration of psychology as a field. Uh, and that I don't know, that idea that the well, the idea that psychology wasn't yet a field, I kind of knew going into grad school, and that was in the back of my mind throughout the whole thing. So that's what I wrote my dissertation on, how to unify psychology. I mean, you can go read it. I put it into a book, Man's Guide to Psychology. Um, and that basically says, I mean, it breaks emotions down. It says what emotions are. I think that's the crux of it, and how the different parts of emotions, how emotions interact, or how we can relate with our emotions in order to create a psychological identity. Um, and then what I did is I pretty much spent the next 3 years, I mean, just listening to people talk. Um, I spent a lot of time in groups, working in like halfway house kind of places, a lot of drug and alcohol rehab places. Sometimes I would run the groups, usually I wouldn't though. But I would either way, I would just, be listening to people talk. And I realized like, oh yeah, when people are talking about what's going on, they're just talking about different parts of their emotions. That they're just hitting these points that I talk about in my book. And you could do it in a healthy way or you could do it in an unhealthy way. Um, and I thought, well, that makes sense. That's what you'd have to do in therapy. And
Yeah.
and Jung's a big influence too, I think. So that's more like the microcosm. The macrocosm is just understanding that there is a psyche there, it's objective, and the whole therapeutic process is really about taking unconscious issues and making them conscious. I mean, Jung talks about complexes, these macro high order um, unconscious concepts, but I think if you break that down, it just becomes feelings. So it's just about how do we make feelings conscious? And I just think there's a way you talk through your feelings, through situations to do that. And I'm not saying, oh, if you just talk through this once, this issue is going to become conscious. That's not how it works. I do know that if you engage with this process enough, your issues will tend to become more conscious. So, yeah.
So I want to just summarize that to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you basically observed, you were taking notes on how people talked about their emotional problems. And you noticed that there was a particular way that people who got better were talking about them, and a particular way that people who didn't Is that, and you compared the two and essentially said, oh, there are commonalities here between people who get better and people who don't.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I started to realize that eventually, but at first it was just noticing people talking, saying, "Oh, look, you're talking about this aspect of emotion. You're talking about this aspect." Right? You can really only talk about what the feeling is, how you feel it, what the situation is that caused the feeling, what it means about you,
Yeah,
any
the
associated
fundamentals.
memories, and how you are responsible for the feeling, if not. And you can do that in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. And yeah, of course, I noticed that, and I didn't know if it was causation, correlation, or whatever, but there's clear that the people who get better, they talk through their issues in a certain way. And when they don't, it's clear what they're doing. And I don't care about your attitude. I don't care if you show up on time. I don't care what you look like. There may be some indication there. I'm not, I'm not gonna lie, but there's something that's going on that's way more important. You know,
Mhm.
I get too many stories I have of guys who sound like Jordan Peterson. I mean, I have the story in the book. I don't know how far you guys got into it, but yeah, I mean, there's many stories like that of guys who sound like Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink mix into one, and they're dead within a week because
Mm.
you're not really addressing the issues that you need to address. You know that responsibility matters. You know you want your life to get better, but that doesn't mean it's psychological change. You have to look at your unconscious issues that affect you, regardless of what you want, regardless of what you think you care about.
Yeah.
And and in my mind, I mean, it's just very obvious when you hear people talk about issues like what's happening.
Well, lots of people talk about this and they'll talk about the importance of emotions. But I think what I get from you reading the book is a sense that although this might seem like a simple observation, that things are deeper, they're more fundamental, they have to do with emotions and the unconscious drives, which are leading to those emotions. But that maybe therapy in the way that it's practiced doesn't sufficiently address that, at least not in a systematic way. So
No,
you
not
talk
even
about,
close. Yeah, it's pretty
right,
bad.
yeah. So tell me about that. Tell me about CBT or other forms of therapy as well, and how they're failing to actually get to the heart of the matter here.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, the two I guess how I characterize it, there's CBT, there's psychodynamic, and there's validation therapy. Is this even the right way to talk about it? The long and the short of it is cognitive behavioral therapy is clear, but it doesn't get to the root of the issue. Psychodynamic therapy does get to the root of the issue. It does understand that, yeah, you have an unconscious there and it's coming up for you, and we need to relate with the unconscious in a healthy way to overcome these symptoms. But there's no clear way of doing that. So I think we just need the clarity of CBT with the depth of psychodynamic. But to your point, most schools now, I've been to three graduate schools. Um, well, one of the schools basically taught what I would refer to as validation therapy. It's this Rogerian approach to just validate people until they grow. And there is, of course, a truth to that. But and I think that's what therapists do anyways, because people come in and talk about their feelings and they don't know you don't know what emotions are. So you don't really know how to respond. You just know how to validate. And I think that's where you get a lot of bad parts in modern therapy. Like the Abigail Shriers of the world will say, well, when you go to therapy, all you do is indulge your feelings. Look what it does. And she's right. She's right. How it's practiced now, you go in and indulge, and these things become worse. That's two fundamental ways that we can approach our emotions. We can either indulge them or repress them. And therapy attracts people who indulge their emotions, and they go in there and they, talk about their mom for 9.5 years and how, you don't like her casserole, and it
Mhm.
doesn't go anywhere because there's no direction. Am I answering your
Yeah,
question? Is this?
you are. And I'm thinking because you said that there is some validity to it. I've heard also that two kinds of people go to therapy, people who need uh tightening, people who need loosening. I wonder if maybe that kind of therapy works for a certain type of person, a person who is really repressed and doesn't talk about their feelings at all. Maybe just telling them that it's okay to feel things helps for that sort
Yeah.
of person.
But that
Um,
that that does work, and that's
yeah.
good. But that's one part of this overall picture.
Mhm.
And look, I totally get that if who's repressed, I mean, I was talking about King of the Hill, like if somebody like Hank Hill goes into
Mhm.
therapy and is just encouraged to indulge his
Maybe that
emotions,
basic stuff is good.
he's gonna get better. Like
Mm.
things are going to improve. But there's a downside to that. And you need to be aware of the downside. And you need to be aware of how that validation of the feeling fits in this overall picture. I mean, obviously, validation of feelings is vital in therapy. I say in the book, feelings are the metaphysics of therapy.
Mm.
But what do you do with that feeling? You got to keep going with it. But yeah, it's a good place to start, you
Well,
know.
still have so many
All,
questions,
all,
but I
all
want
kinds
to
of
let
therapy
Connor get a
have their
word in
high
as
points.
well.
They all have their strengths. Oh, I'm sorry, you were saying?
Well,
Oh,
I was gonna ask, one of the things that you said earlier was how you wrote your dissertation on um, a unification of psychology, right, or something along those lines, because
Hmm.
you were saying that psychology is not really a field, and I think for people who are not familiar with psychology as a field, they might not know exactly what you mean by that. Um, and I'm curious if you could expand on that. Why is psychology not a field yet?
Well, there's just no agreed upon problems that we address. I mean, it's kind of like this offshoot of philosophy, and and it's something about the mind, or is it the brain? Does psychology involve neuroscience? There's no clear definition of the basic concepts of the field. And that's what I wanted to put forth in my dissertation, or I mean, we'll just call it my first book now.
Okay, so what you're saying is that in order for something to be a field, it has to have fundamental principles, and you're
Yes.
supplying that in this book.
Yes, it says fundamental principles from which the rest of the field can be derived and tested, or at least examined. And psychology doesn't have that. And I think uh, the most glaring hole or vague spot in the field is around emotions, because that's what psychology comes down to. Is because we make decisions with our emotions. That's what they're there for. And if we're making decisions that hurt us, which is what lands us in therapy, there's clearly an emotional issue there that's coming up, and you need to first know, what emotions are and how they work to address that properly. If you have
yeah.
any chance at all of doing it. So,
Well, this keeps coming up, this idea of emotions and people not really knowing what emotions are. And I think that probably strikes a lot of people, even myself, as sort of strange because at least we walk around every day feeling like we understand
yeah.
what emotions are. So, what do you mean by that when you say that people don't understand emotions, even psychologists?
Well, yeah, I mean, we understand that emotions exist, and there's a lot of charts that will categorize them, I mean, you'll see a lot of those like color wheel kind of charts but that still doesn't tell you what an emotion is, or what its purpose is, or how it functions.
So,
And
what is an
that's,
emotion?
uh, well, actually, I said something in the book, but I think Connor helped me to pick a better word for it. But it's I just call it a neurophysiological state. It's something that stems from the brain, and it's something that you sense. And all it tells you is that something that you care about, a value that you have, it could be a negative or positive value, is present in the environment. And that happens all the time. I'm feeling great now talking to you guys, right? And this is telling me, oh, this is something fun that you need to do, Mark, and keep doing stuff like this.
Yeah, I think you said in the book, I think the exact definition you give in the book is emotions are neurophysiological states that indicate your value is at stake.
Right.
And one of the questions I had, and I've talked about this with a few other people, and it's one of the things I think that uh, people find strange in your work or struggle with is um, because you say there are only two emotions, right? Anger and anxiety. And you
Hmm.
distinguish emotions from feeling states. So you say like I suppose joy or uh, pity or things like these are feeling states,
Hmm.
and they're basically like the fundamental emotions, anger and anxiety, in combination within certain contexts. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
Okay. One of the issues that I have with this is um, if we're, when if our concepts, if we have to reduce our concepts back to concrete reality, um, there seems to be something wrong with saying you only have two emotions, anger and anxiety. Um, because you say, anger drives you towards a positive value, right? Or
Hmm.
or not necessarily drives you towards, but it drives you towards something.
Yeah,
It
healthy anger would drive you towards a positive value.
yeah,
Unhealthy anger would drive you towards a, yeah, but anger drives you forward and anxiety pulls you back.
right. So it seems like those are functions of emotions, not not what we describe as emotions themselves. Like an emotion itself is very much a feeling state,
Hmm.
um, just empirically speaking. So it almost seems like it would be more accurate to say that we have all these emotions, anger, joy, sadness, etc. But there are only two functions. There's a binary function: move you forward, pull you away. That seems to me more accurate than saying, well, we only have two emotions. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but it's a common question I've gotten from people when I've talked to them about it.
Well, well, the reason I don't say that it would just be a function, although it is that, is because, I mean, you can kind of see how you can use what I would say the two fundamental emotions, anger, and anxiety, in different ways to achieve different feeling states, you know? So it's not just a function if you are actually engaging with the content of the emotion to achieve different things, right?
So elaborate on that because, I'm thinking about something like sadness. And it seems like anxiety or like excitement, it feels like there's like an energy to that. It feels like there's energy to anger as well. But in the way that most people use the terms emotions, they would include something like sadness or uh, depression, like sort of low energy emotional states in the definition of emotion. And
Hmm.
they might say that that doesn't drive you anywhere in particular. It sort of sedates you. And so how does something like that fit into your framework, something which doesn't drive in a particular
Yeah,
direction?
I mean, perceptively, you don't feel it driving you anywhere, but it's still telling you to do something. You may just be unaware of it.
Okay. So is it, would you say that's like anger or anxiety, or how do you build something like depression out of anger and anxiety?
Well, depression, I would just be like, well, I would just say it's something you've avoided anger for
Okay.
a really long time. And you've probably done it so much that it's just become unconscious. And a lot of people who are depressed, they don't even know they feel anger anymore. I mean, they just completely, and a lot of times just cut that out from their life until they, drink 10 beers and then punch somebody in the face, right? Then, well, where did that come from?
Interesting. So if you're avoiding anger, um, you're avoiding like a drive to something. Seems like you could
Yeah.
also phrase that as like you are driving towards nothing or maybe lethargy, or you're driving towards spending all your time browsing social media, something like that. So I guess I'm curious about also the difference between driving towards versus away something. Seems like in some sense, if you are going towards something, you are necessarily going away from something else and vice versa. Um,
Hmm.
so you could say that just like all emotions move you in a direction, but you are specifically using this binary away and towards. Why is that?
Um, well, I mean, could you think of any other way it could move you? Like you could go towards a certain value or away from a certain value, and the
I
value
guess
could be positive or negative. So I think that pretty much covers everything.
yeah.
Unless you can think of something that's not covered by it. I mean,
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is that like if you have towards and away, it
Mm.
implies like a neutral center versus if you just say that like everything is driving towards something, um, then necessarily that would mean that like there's sort of no distinction between towards and away. They're all just, you drive towards that value or that value. Uh, but there's no like true neutral center ground to which to return to. So I guess what I'm getting at fundamentally is like, why use two directions at all? If you're going to say that depression itself is also driving towards a value.
Well, but you're also moving away from something. So isn't it good to just note both of those?
Yeah,
I mean, look,
true. So
anger
I
and
guess maybe you're saying
anxiety. I
they're
mean,
all combined
yeah,
necessarily.
well, anger and anxiety, it, that they exist together.
Yeah.
But like it's weird because it's like we're looking at anger and anxiety like they exist separately, like, but that's just this high abstract kind of thinking. But really, in real life, they're both happening all the time. And I just think it helps to provide context, I guess. I mean, maybe there's a better answer I have to this. Um, I've never heard that argument, so I'd have to think about it. But I would just think like, yeah, just helps to put things in context. Like, yeah, I'm driving, I want to go towards my couch because I'm going away from this party.
Hmm. Yeah, would you say maybe you could say that there's one emotion, which is the anger anxiety mix, and necessarily they always exist together because whenever you're driving towards something, you're driving away from something else.
Yep. Well, I don't think that, I mean, they do exist together, but when you talk about them, it's good to think of them separately, especially in therapy. And I mean, that's the basis of my loop, which is a principle of therapy I get into. And I think it's really good to distinguish anger and anxiety because you need to be aware of these disparate feeling states when you're having them. I mean, that's how you're going to end up navigating your life in a healthier way. And that really helps to understand that, yeah, you want to drive towards something and away from something else. And navigating that in your mind is really a part of therapy. So I guess if you're just saying I want to go towards something, then you would never address the fact that you do in fact want to move away from something else. And in fact, the whole reason why you're moving towards the couch is because of all your issues you have, the socialization with the party.
Hmm. So they're deeply connected in that way.
Yeah. And some people may in fact be on the couch because they just have more issues driving them towards the couch and not so much away from the party. It really
Hmm.
depends on the person.
Yeah.
But I think it is really good to split it into this
Yeah.
push pull because that really helps analyze it and differentiate in real time so you can
I'll
Yeah, I
say like
think
one last thing on it, which is maybe just like you could synthesize by saying that like emotions are like the fundamental bedrock value states from which every other action and feeling springs. And a value state necessarily involves like a push and a pull away from something. So maybe when you're saying like there's anger and anxiety as emotions, you're saying that people have pushes, they have drives, right? And everything kind of comes out of that. So maybe that's another framework to think about it, which is different from the anger anxiety, but still getting at the root of what you're describing.
well, what would be the benefit of that though?
I just want to rephrase because I think when you say that there's only two emotions, anger, anxiety, to me that seems like kind of strange, right? But I think that maybe the way that I internally conceptualize it is that we have some sort of set of values, uh, basically like push or pull, two different things, and
Hmm.
emotions, sensations of anger or depression, sensations of happiness, etc. Those come out of those value states. That's how I internally conceptualize it. That seems like less alien to my mind, but I think it's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, it sounds like you're addressing the same thing from a philosophical perspective. You're just starting with the values, which there's, a lot of legitimacy there. But this is psychology. So yeah, I mean, yeah, if we're talking about this philosophically, then yeah, we would start with values.
Okay.
But I
Yeah,
think
I
because we're
guess you could
talking
use
about it
them sort of
psychologically,
similarly.
yeah.
yeah, so perhaps a way to think about this and why we need to think about both is for values, we can either not have a value and want to go out and get it, or we can already have a value and we want to protect it from something that might take it away from us. And I think
Hmm.
anxiety, whenever you're moving towards something, you're obviously moving away from something else. But I think when I think about anxiety, I think more about protection. It's like I have something and I'm going to lose it if I, go in this particular direction. So I'm going to shrink back because I need to protect this. Whereas anger is more like I don't have that, but I really want it, and I'm going to go towards it. So it's more about protection, protecting something you already have or going after something you don't have. That might
Hmm.
be another way to think of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is a theory that I say in my way. This is how I explain it. I think what you guys are doing is just coming up with different ways of saying the same thing, which I would encourage. And, I mean, I want therapists to start using my model, and I think they're going to come up with a whole different ways of employing it and thinking about it and talking about it with people that I never could have thought on my own. So, you can look at it from a philosophical perspective. You can look at anxiety from a more of a protection perspective. I mean, I think that's kind of built into the restraining something. But whatever. This is, I think, the best way I could think of saying it after talking with or hearing how many people talk that I have heard. I think this is just the
Yeah.
easiest way.
Yeah. Well, so to shift gears a little bit, I want to go back to, something that you said, but it was almost something like you said in passing, where you said, people come to therapy because they're having trouble making a decision that they want to make. Like they want to act in a certain way, but they feel unable to. And I'm wondering if you can drill down a little bit on that, because I think why do people come to therapy is something that in popular culture, at least, you don't hear a ton of talk about. Like, why are people actually here? And I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, well, you just talk to somebody who's going to therapy the first time and you ask them why they're going, they would say something like, "Oh, my mother-in-law, whatever, stand-up comedy from the 80s joke, right?" But really what's going on there is there's some relationship with their mother-in-law and they don't know how to act. They don't know what to do. There's something about this relationship that's troubling, but ultimately what that boils down to is there's decisions here that you're not making or you don't know are possible for you to make. So there's some constriction on your will, on your volition. And that's what therapy is for, is to dig down, right? Because in my theory, I mean, I don't think this is very controversial to say that our decisions are emotional. There are other things, but they are emotional in their nature. We wouldn't make decisions without emotions or feeling states. Um, so yeah, that's what you have to dig into. Those feelings, those unconscious feelings that are somehow tripping you up when it comes to your mother-in-law. Is that clear?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, we come to therapy essentially when we've lost our willpower. We've lost our
Yeah,
ability to make a decision.
right. Yeah, like I want to make this relationship with my mother-in-law work, but I can't. Maybe that's a little bit on a grander level, but yeah, exactly.
And the reason for that is there's an unconscious emotion. So there's an emotion we're not aware of, or maybe some sort of constellation or
Yeah, of
complex.
course, a constellation, yeah, to use a Jungian term, sure. I mean, there's he would call it a complex, but a complex is just made up of various feeling states that are driving your decisions that you are not aware of. And so really what you're doing is you think you're interacting with your mother-in-law, but really what you're doing is you're trying to protect a part of yourself or a complex or something.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, earlier you also mentioned it was people that sound like Jordan Peterson or Jocko Willink who end up dead. I've observed like a similar situation where there's so many people who will ostensibly on the surface, they really value something like discipline or willpower. And yet you look at their life and there's so many areas of their life where, you know, they're totally undisciplined. They totally lack willpower.
Oh yeah, like if
And
you ever see a guy out in public with like a discipline shirt or some shirt that like
yeah,
just call some mental health hotline or something. Like that dude is, oh my, yeah.
he's
Yeah,
struggling,
we
I
all
think.
want discipline, dude. Thanks, but also, why do I stay up late watching dumb action movies?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can be like a
This is
psychological
what,
protection as
like
well.
I say in the book, this is like the one question that Socrates couldn't get through. Like, what's going on?
Mhm.
It's
No, I mean,
amazing.
it's a
But
great
yeah.
question. Yeah.
And right
And
now we're split in culture with like the Jocko Willings or the therapy culture people.
mhm.
And they both think the other side's like an idiot, but really what's going on is they're just not connecting their sides. They're
Yeah,
not
no, I
seeing
totally
how the
agree.
other is just like an inverse or some reflection of themselves. And we need a unification of psychology to do that. Sorry, I interrupted you. You
Nope.
were saying.
You're the guest here, so please feel free to interrupt anytime.
Okay.
Like we want to put your ideas on platform here. I'm just agreeing because I think I see a similar dynamic playing out where two groups have a sort of pathological relationship to desire, and one group really yearns for that discipline, and to the point where I think it can be a sort of a projection where someone sort of claims to be really into discipline. And that is a way of protecting the ego, the self from recognizing that like, oh, actually they're really undisciplined in their lives in so many ways. And
Hmm.
if they were to recognize that they're actually like destroying their bodies by overeating, um, the fact that they cling to the fact that they wake up every day at like 5 a.m. I'm thinking of a very specific person right now who wakes up like consistently super early. They're so proud of that. But they have a totally unhealthy relationship with food. And being able to recognize that they have that unhealthy relationship requires them first to recognize that they're actually not disciplined in their life. And that's very hard to do because they've built up this mythology and they reinforce that with this kind of tertiary behavior, which is waking up early. So
Yeah.
I see that kind of projection all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, discipline's a great value, but it's high order. And you can't just choose to be just well, if you can, then fine, then you don't have a psychological issue. You wouldn't even think of it. I mean,
Mhm.
there's like, there's lots of things you're disciplined about. You don't even think that's discipline. But it's all the things that you don't do so well that you think, oh, I'm undisciplined.
Yeah,
Well, it's just
absolutely.
because you're getting some payoff, there's some gratification, there's some familiar state in not being disciplined. Or there's an issue
Mhm.
in your life, like, okay, so yeah, you want to be disciplined, but you have a terrible relationship with women. I mean, which is what happens with guys all the time. You have all this resentment for your mom and woman and whatever, whoever
Mhm.
rejected you. And um, yeah, you so I mean it's just backwards, and then guys will think, oh, okay, I'm just going to be really disciplined, then I'll get an attractive or whatever this perfect girlfriend. But you're going backwards, right? You need to relate with women in a healthier way, and from there comes the discipline, and you won't even think about it. Like you don't have to think about being disciplined to comb your hair every morning
Sure.
or
Yeah.
floss your teeth. I mean, some people don't floss, right? And they have to like be disciplined to do that.
So are you saying then that if I have some area of my life where I'm like, oh, I need to be disciplined, and I develop some kind of routine, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna really stick to this. Um, if I'm already feeling like that, like, oh, I need to be disciplined about this, then that already suggests there's an unconscious issue that's actually preventing me from just doing what I want to do when I think about it.
Usually, usually. I mean, not all the time. Sometimes you lay out a plan and you do it. And to that, I say, great. I mean, keep doing that. Keep doing that with your life until it doesn't work. Then you might want to consider therapy if it's important enough.
Right, but if you're feeling basically like a certain amount of resistance, then if you've made a decision, but you're feeling a certain amount of resistance and it's actually hindering
Hmm.
your ability to follow through, then you might start to think, okay, maybe I have an unconscious issue that I need to uncover.
Yeah. Yeah. Why does this keep happening? Why can't I wake up at a certain time? Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but you don't feel resistance so much. I think a lot of guys will just try to psych themselves up, which is their way of really trying to overcome the resistance or trying to pretend it's not there or something. Or, and guys will tell themselves all the time things that are true but are irrelevant because,
So what's an example of that? Something true but irrelevant that you tell yourself.
uh, well, like anytime you face a fear, right? Like, oh, I'm going to give this public speaking, I'm going to do this public speaking thing. Whatever happens, it doesn't matter. Well, all that matters is I get up there and I really try, which is probably, I mean, there's truth to that, but you're telling yourself that because you know in the back of your mind what does happen really matters because I don't really have an identity built up around public speaking or whatever. I'm not really good at it. And I'm actually going to inform a lot of my self concept from some feedback that I do get.
Interesting.
Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I want to actually shift into the fundamental principles. I want to talk about what you lay out. But before we do that, I do want to. It looks like Taff has a question, so I want to give her a chance to ask that. If
Oh, I mean, I don't have a super specific question. I think, of course, there's lots that could still be said or asked about this. Um, I guess if the floor is being thrown to me, I'll take the opportunity though. Um, One other phenomenon that I've noticed on this point about discipline or how we self-conceptualize ourselves is that it seems like there are some people for whom doing quote unquote like disciplined things, for example, exercise, comes very naturally. And they don't really have to work very hard to do it. They just sort of do it. And it doesn't require overcoming that resistance. I think this is something we've already identified in the conversation. Interestingly, those people also seem to talk a lot about discipline. And they will talk about how other people just need to be disciplined like they are, just like do things
Hmm.
like exercise. And I wonder how much of the conversation about discipline um, has to do with this kind of miscommunication that's occurring, where people who are naturally doing these things describe it as discipline and are like, I'm really disciplined. You guys just need to be disciplined. And people who are not naturally doing these things also interpret that as, I just need to like force through and do this. Both groups sort of believe that you can just sort of willpower or muscle or free will your way into switching the behavior. Um, the people who are disciplined believe they're doing this. They don't recognize that they're sort of just naturally inclined.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder how much you think that is also playing into it, this kind of miscommunication going
Oh
both
yeah, I
ways.
mean that's a huge part of it, sure. And but you say disciplined and undisciplined people like they're two different groups of people. It's really just disciplined and undisciplined in a certain context or in a certain field. Like, yeah, the guy who gets up and works out can be really undisciplined in other areas. And he looks at somebody else who doesn't work out and thinks, "Oh, I'm more disciplined than they are."
Mhm.
Right? But then they go to the chemistry lecture and it can be completely opposite. So yeah, we both need to recognize that, yeah, for some of us it's just easier to do some things and it's not us pushing our way through, it's something else going on that gives us the ability to do that. I mean, like Jocko Willink, he talks about discipline all the time and, staying hard or something. I was I was about to say get hard, but like,
Just get a
that's
get
probably
all the
not what he
time.
says. I'm gonna get a get hard bumper sticker. But it's like, dude, like, yeah, like that's what it looks like to you. But you
Mhm.
have a wife, you have all these friends, you have this huge community. Like, what's going on there? That's
Mhm.
what you need to talk about.
Mm.
Not waking up at 5 a.m. and hey, buy my new watch that ticks off like how many weeks you have left to live in your life. Like, And by the way, if you want to do that, if those things help, then go ahead and do it. But that's not psychology. And if you do that and you're still not disciplined, maybe something isn't wrong with you. Maybe something is, but maybe you're just approaching the issue from a fundamentally incorrect way. And the only reason you're doing that is because of the way you need to approach the issue. Actually, society hasn't even figured out what that field is yet.
Mm.
That's the idea.
Mm.
So this brings up another question for me, which I've gotten into a little bit with some other people who are actually fans of your work or who are fans of Jungian psychology or depth psychology. Um, and it's about the free will issue. Because I think some people will hear this and they'll say something like, "Oh, so are you saying that human beings don't have free will? Are you saying that we actually are not really in control of any of our decisions?" And I've talked to some people uh, who believe that based on depth psychology or even based on their own interpretation of what you're saying, which is basically like, well, you're just totally driven by your unconscious, and you don't really have any control over your decisions. And I'm curious what you're actually saying here.
You do have control over your decisions, just not directly, just not in the way that you think you do. You don't have control over your decisions at the decision level. I mean, that's what a complex is. Like you're making these decisions, you don't want to be making them. There's something else driving you. So yeah, on the surface, you don't have it seems like you lack free will. And maybe you do to some degree. Um, but you just need to approach the issue from a different way. Like, yeah, you can't addiction is all about losing willpower, and that's how cut my teeth or whatever. Is that the expression in this field?
Yeah.
Just dealing with addiction. Clearly, that's a willpower issue. You don't have any control over that, but you do have control over learning about how your psychology works. You have control over, how you address your issues. You have control over where whether you show up to the therapy. So let's look at these things that you do have control over. Yeah, there's some things that you don't. I mean, and that's clear. And I mean, I think that's like a huge another lack of communication between these two different sides of culture. And you get gray area views on volition because of this, like compatibilism, things like that. But really, what I think it comes down to is understanding this divide between I think really what it comes down to is understanding emotions and how they work. And if you do seem to lack willpower, it's because there's an emotional issue acting out. And you just need to really give voice to that emotional issue, put words to it, as I say, so that you act out less.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that's a really important distinction to make because it's an issue that I've run into with people who are more on the psychodynamic side of things. Um, is
Well,
that
that's been a huge part of psychodynamic for a long time is we don't have
yeah,
free will. I mean, we're just
yeah,
driven by these unconscious forces, and you just kind of go into therapy and express this, and it just takes the weight off, and it's all, you know, true but vague. Anyway, I'm sorry. You were saying about,
yeah. Well, it reminds me of was it is it Francis Bacon who said nature to be commanded must be obeyed?
yeah, sure. I
So
think it
it's
I
might have
believe
been
it.
him. Knowledge is power.
yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying something like that. Like
Yeah,
it's not that you don't have control. It's just that you have to understand the nature of the psyche in order to
yeah,
have that control.
exactly. Yeah, the psyche is objective. It's there just like physics or biology or chemistry, and it has a certain nature. Yeah, we can make a certain chemical compound, but you need to study the periodic tables first. And you can make certain decisions. You, you can't just make yourself do it. You need to study the periodic table of your emotions. You need to go in and get really exacting about what's going on in your inner life and get really specific about that. And I mean, I think my book's really controversial in that respect. Doesn't maybe seem that controversial, but stuff like that, it is. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important clarification. So with that said, what are the fundamental principles of therapy, according to Mark Derian?
Well, the first one is honesty. That just involves talking through feelings in a certain way, which I we talked about when I was working in rehab clinics, seeing how people talk, and you need to talk through a feeling in a certain way. Then there's the loop, which is your unconscious emotional pattern that leads to your behaviors, or as Taff would say, your values, your beliefs. Right? From a psychological perspective, those come at the end. From a philosophical perspective, that comes first. And then there's the ritual, which is just how you continue to engage with just did different ways of practicing honesty and noticing your loop. And that's what therapy is. It's not work, it's just focus on these three things that really matter. And it's really easy to get distracted by other things. And people have been through my program and I continue to work with them because I have this group and everything. I mean, just a big part of that is just saying to them, that's not your issue. That's the symptom. You're getting distracted by the symptom. Let's bring it back to these principles. And that's not work. It's just, again, focus. So,
So in the honesty part, we're trying to get to, okay, what's really going on emotionally underneath the hood, and let's talk about that in a certain way, in an honest way.
right.
Um, and then once we start talking about that, we start to realize what the loop is. And the loop is basically
Hmm.
the compensation that we've developed as a result of the unconscious emotional issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a way of saying it. Yeah. And that's how I came up with the idea of the loop is, I mean, I put these, uh, uh, well, the principle of honesty, I didn't call it that at the time, but I started working with people and have them talk through feelings in that way. And then it became really clear, oh, there's this pattern that you go through. And it just presents in different ways. And these symptoms that that you came into therapy about, like, oh, my girlfriend, this or that, or do I break up with whoever? That's not your issue, right? That's the symptom. So, yeah.
So let's walk through a concrete example of honesty loop ritual.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's take a mother-in-law. So let's say some guy, I don't know, has a difficult time with his mother-in-law. She, I don't know, makes all these passive aggressive comments and that imply that he's a loser or something. Okay, so that's the situation. I mean, how would he feel about that? Maybe some kind of anger, resentment. And then I would just ask him, what does that resentment specifically mean about you? I
Mm.
mean, one meaning could be, I care about what my mother-in-law thinks. I would keep going with that. And if the situation dictated it, but I would take it to a memory that's, or if that resentment triggers a memory or something, that can help to get to meaning. But we'll just say for now, oh, this resentment that I have in this situation, in the context of my mother-in-law, it means I care about what she thinks. So his responsibility, this guy's responsibility, I mean, the three ways I look at responsibility is just the payoff. I mean, what's the benefit you get for feeling resentful? Well, I can blame my grandmother or my mother-in-law for things, and not look at my own life. Not look at whatever my drinking problem. How you contribute to the resentment? Well, I don't bring it up. I don't talk about it with my mother-in-law. And then how do you relate with your mother-in-law? Okay, so your mother-in-law is being passive aggressive with you. The challenge is to, be charitable with your mother-in-law, like what's she really feeling? Well, yeah, you are kind of a loser and she doesn't really know how to talk with you about it, so she says these passive aggressive comments. Have you ever been in a
Mhm.
situation where you've been upset with somebody, you didn't feel like you could say anything, and so you just make passive aggressive comments? Like, yeah, I do that, 10 times a day, right? And it's just about relating with your mother-in-law, not like minimizing what she does or whether it's wrong. It's just can you see your situation?
Like I can give another like personal example from my life, adding on to that. Um, I have tended to in my life get like really upset about sort of like minor things and take them very personally. So, as a totally ridiculous example, there was one time I was driving home from a football game and the map on my phone was loading kind of slowly. And I had the feeling that the fact that the map was loading slowly was an indictment of my character because I had failed to like check the coverage maps appropriately of my cellular provider and get like the
Hmm.
optimal one. So I was looking at this thing that totally like in any reasonable person's mind does not indicate something bad about them. And I was like, this is why I'm a loser. Like this is a reason I should feel bad about myself. And I think that I recognize that similarly, like I struggle to speak up with people and express my opinions generally due to this feeling of like lack of assurance, inadequacy. What I've realized as I've gotten older is that in order to help with that, I have needed to develop consistent habits in my life and things that I can be proud of. So, for example, like, um, I spend like a certain amount of time every day learning Spanish. And that has been really helpful for me because it's developed that self-confidence and it's allowed me to, in those situations, the map isn't loading slowly. I have the self-assuredness to feel okay about myself. And so the map not loading feels like, oh, this one thing is like bothering me. And if I just like had optimized my life so perfectly that I never ran into these issues, I'd be okay. That would be an improvement in my psychology. But no, that's actually not the problem. The problem for me was that I was not living up to my own expectations and not doing things that actually developed that sense of self-confidence and value. And so doing that in other areas of my life, learning to be sort of, disciplined, has helped me to not be upset with every tiny issue that comes up in my life. Um, but
Hmm.
I find when I look at all other people, and my mother was telling me like, you need to stand up for yourself more in social interactions. And I'm responding to her like, I think you're right. And the way that I'm learning to stand up for myself in social interactions is by reading more and doing my Spanish consistently, because that's building the self-confidence that's ultimately allowing me to do that. So I find that in my own life, there are so many instances where I can think of a behavior which is sort of maladaptive or bad, and it's actually being caused by something pretty fundamental, which feels kind of abstract. Um, but it's hard for
Hmm.
people to track that in their own lives. So I don't know. Maybe the personal story also helps viewers connect to it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're being critical of yourself there. And I would say that, yeah, the self-criticism is a symptom of anxiety. And it sounds like you're
Mhm.
addressing that anxiety in other ways. I mean, I would say that your two ways of addressing anxiety involve you being alone. So I'm a little concerned about that. I think there's probably more fundamental ways you could address your anxiety. But yeah, I mean, that's a good start, I would say. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, ultimately, I mean, the loop comes down to how you use unhealthy anxiety to repress your healthy needs, your healthy anger.
Mhm.
Um, and a healthy need for you could be just read, learn a language. I don't think a lot of people have too much anxiety around that. It has more to do with talking to people, especially my mom and dad. But yeah, that's the
Mm.
general idea.
Yeah.
But so
Well,
that's why, right?
yeah.
That's why it's important when you get self-critical to not even address that, because we
Not
can
even address
recognize
what.
that, and maybe it's just my experience around these ideas, but I recognize that as, oh, that's part of your payoff. Right. And we're not going to address that. We're like, okay, that is what she does to protect herself from certain things in certain situations.
Mhm.
Right? What is she protecting herself from? Yeah.
Yeah.
The, the language, the reading, that's all part of it too.
Yeah. I think also like there can be a sense in which we don't try things because to try and fail would negatively impact our self-image. So it's easier to just like do simple things which kind of masturbate the need. Uh, Like if I browse social media, it feels like I'm doing something productive, sort of like masturbates that desire. It's not actually doing that, but it's very easy to do that. And there's no real like consequences either way. So you don't grow from it. You don't really challenge yourself. And ultimately, you are left still lacking those achievements, which would ultimately give you the feeling of like self-satisfaction. Like, I feel like I've been productive. So you end up sort of more hollow at the end of it than at the beginning.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean that's the big thing. Like, yeah, well, I can't try something. I mean, usually with guys, it's I can't ask that girl out because if I get rejected, then it's just gonna paint my, self-image. And I mean, that's a good sign that maybe you're not ready to talk to girls, right? And then you talk to guys like that, and it's clear, oh yeah, you still haven't separated from your mom. You still have her beliefs and her wishes floating around in her head. You still don't want your mom to cry. Like
Hmm.
that's the main issue, right? Like
Hmm.
you can't stand your mom rejecting you. How are you gonna,
Hmm. Yeah.
so that's what we go into there. I'm like, yeah, if guys say like, oh, if I go talk to a girl, like uh, I'm gonna feel terrible for 6 months. I say, okay, don't talk to girls then.
Hmm.
You're not ready to do that. We'll get you ready.
Yeah. Well, I've also recognized in my own life, like my attraction to men and also even like my transition is in some way probably motivated by a desire for affection from my father. Like I remember very early on, being in middle school, my dad's not in the house, and there's people like bullying me, and there's like an older boy who steps in and tells me that he's going to like protect me. And so I have this like deep psychological desire, like, oh, I need to like attach myself to this person and act in a way where he is going to like give me that kind of wardship. Um, I need to be sort of like malleable and appeal to him. That psychological need carries over into transition. It also carries over into, I'm laying at bed at night. I'm thinking about like, you know, maybe this great romance that I could have with someone. And maybe fundamentally, there is like a sexual aspect to that. But also, it's, I want my dad to like hug me because I didn't have that enough growing up. And so recognizing that allows me to be like a little bit more honest about where my feelings are actually coming from. And that if I'm chasing transition or sexual gratification or whatever, I'm recognizing that it's not actually fulfilling that deeper need for parental affection. And so, as long as I'm chasing kind of the symbol, what feels like it's going to satisfy that, I'm never going to be satisfied. Instead, I have to address the more fundamental relationship, which is has to do with my childhood and my father and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the whole idea of trans would be a lot more accepted if trans people were just more open about why they would do things. Like it's same with cis people too. Like I always use the example, like when I go to the shirt, or when I go to the park, I take my shirt off and act like a big douche. If I didn't acknowledge that I'm just like trying to get attention, like I would be out of it. So if you're
Hmm.
a man and you show up as a woman. I think there's just a level where you have to acknowledge, like, yeah, I'm just kind of crazy. And maybe there's some craziness, maybe there's some real legitimate parts, like I'm obviously.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's both,
Yeah.
and it's a balance, and it's not like I was born this way, this is who I am. Same thing with the gay thing too, but that's probably more controversial. But yeah, I mean,
Okay, well, tell us about that. What is the gay thing?
well, I mean, do I even have to get into it? I, I mean, I just think I mean, my whole thing about homosexuality is I just think it's funny that we live in a culture where everything is in question. Why you say things, oh, you just have that political belief because of this thing, or you just believe you're just dating her because she's like this, da, 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 da. And everything is open to psychoanalysis. Except if you're gay, then we can't have any questions about it. And that's just like kind of
Hmm.
ridiculous. But
Well, I definitely appreciate the
it just
psychoanalysis about
indicates a
trans
blind
stuff.
spot,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm not saying like it doesn't. I mean, from my perspective, it doesn't matter whether homosexuality is biological or cultural. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
It,
Hmm.
it it's irrelevant. But it's
Hmm.
so clear from my perspective. There's a blind spot when you say, "Oh no, we can't delve into." No, you're just gay. You were born that way. There's nothing else. And really, that's a reaction to your conservative parents, trying to send you to like some conversion thing. that's not right
Mhm.
either. And you're just flipping to the opposite thing.
I think a lot of people are going to hear that and they're going to think it's kind of crazy initially, but I totally agree. And from the
And this is why I
trans
get kicked out of
perspective,
school, by
yeah.
the way.
Well, I mean, from the trans perspective, like people insist on like trans women are women, right? And they hang trans rights on womanhood and this like philosophical, metaphysical definition. But it's like, oh no, like if we hang it on that, that could be so easily overturned.
Yeah,
Or
you're fucked. You're so
yeah,
fucked
if
if you
people
hang it on that. I'm
decide
sorry for
yeah,
how to
no, I
swear.
agree. And we talked earlier in the pre-show about my Reason article. I think it's better to hang it on sort of like freedom, individual
Yeah,
autonomy, because
of
that's more
course.
robust. And similarly with the gay thing, as we're calling it, like, I think people should have the ability, consensual adults, to have sexual relationships with members of the same sex as a matter of personal freedom. And it doesn't matter if it like, is biological or it's
Doesn't
conditioned
matter how
early
gross it
on.
is.
Yeah, either way, it should be allowed. And if you if your argument for gay rights depends on it being biological, and you find out in 10 years, like, oh, it's actually like a
Yeah.
fungus or something,
Yeah.
then it's
Then
like,
what you have to
oh
start doing, you
no.
have to start being anti-science. You have to start saying, "Oh, you're homophobic if you have some," and then it just becomes this crazy ideology. But yeah, you're right. It stems from you just not thinking fundamentally. You're not
Mhm.
thinking philosophically about this, and you take these premises and you run with them, and you don't see where you're going with them, but you're not going to like where you're going.
Yeah, it's dangerous,
And when
ultimately.
you see that, you're just going to cover it up by, cutting your mom out of your life because she voted for Trump or whatever. I'm not saying the right doesn't do that too. It's whatever.
Okay, well, so as much as I love talking about the gays,
Get us back on
um,
track, Connor.
let's let's get a little bit back on track here.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so so when I asked you about, let's take us through a concrete example, it wasn't totally clear to me um, where we're at honesty, where we're at the loop, and where we're at ritual. Because I think I'd
Mhm.
really like to get clear on um, the loop. Like, what does a loop look like? And then how do we get beyond, go through that loop and say, okay, actually, wait a minute, there's this deeper issue under here. And that's actually causing the loop. And we don't need to we don't address this at the level of the loop. We address it at the issue that's underneath it. And I want to see very concretely what that would look like.
Okay, well, I mean, so the guy who has an issue with his mother-in-law, I mean, we would talk through similar issues like that enough. And eventually you start to see patterns. And in fact, everybody has the same pattern. There's the same general loop. You have your healthy anger, which is, a need you have for no other reason than you have it, is my simple, rough way of explaining it. Then you repress that with unhealthy anxiety. You end up in isolation, then you can get your payoff, which for this guy would be complaining about his mother-in-law. Then the belief, which is, I don't know, my mother-in-law hates me or something. You talk through honesty enough and I start to identify what fundamental needs are that people have. And usually that just boils down to, we have a lot of needs, a lot of high concept needs. Taff was talking about like studying a foreign language. But on a very micro, immediate, visceral level, your need is to communicate feelings. So part of the loop would be, oh yeah, you're shutting down things that you want to say to your mother-in-law, but you don't think you can for whatever reason. We would go into that in therapy. That would be part of your anxiety. I mean, I'm trying to go through this very quickly, so maybe that's why it's not making sense. But
Well, so basically what you're saying is you have this healthy need
mhm.
and you repress it for some reason. There's some reason that you repress this healthy need. And in order to compensate for that unfulfilled healthy need, to distract you from it or to get some other sort of gratification in its stead, you end up with a loop. And then,
No, in order to distract you from, I mean, the healthy needs part of the loop.
okay,
To distract you from that, you end up with the payoff or the symptom,
with the payoff.
right? You're criticizing your mother-in-law, you're complaining, you're drinking too much.
Okay.
But the whole thing's part of the loop.
Right, right.
And for a
But
lot of people, that they're not conscious of the first part, they're just conscious of the symptom. And so you think that's the problem. But it's the job of therapy to go and say, well, here's your healthy needs that are going unexpressed. And I know they're healthy because whatever, just certain archetypal things about you being a human and this is what you need to do. Right? Like developing a better relationship with your mother-in-law. So we would just look at and get, very exacting about what you're not saying, what you're hiding, and how to communicate in a healthier way with her. And then when you do that, you're going to see that the passive aggressiveness or the complaining, the criticism, the drinking is going to diminish. I don't know if it's going to diminish right away,
Mhm.
but give it enough iteration, something's going to change, or at least change enough for you to you know readdress that issue later on. I mean, like I say in the book, it's like the scientific method. I can't guarantee that any one practice of the scientific method is going to come to some great theory or some great realization, but that's the process you need to go through when you want to put yourself in a situation to have more, to get at truth.
Okay, so that also brings up another thing that you said in the book, which is very interesting and I think counterintuitive, at least counterintuitive to me, because one of the things that I thought for a long time and that a lot of people think is, okay, so you go into therapy, you talk about your feelings, you understand maybe more what's going on, but eventually you have to like go out and act. You have to go out and act and you have to do things. And that's where the real change happens. And you said in your book, you said, well, actually, when you actually start talking honestly and about the root of your issue, uh, change starts to happen almost spontaneously because the way that you talk about an issue is a reflection of your entire relationship with it. And as you talk about it differently, your relationship to your emotions changes, and as a result, your behavior changes. Or you said something
Mhm.
along those lines in the book.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could elaborate on how that works.
Um, well, I mean, how that works is, if you just process those unconscious issues with your mother-in-law, then the next time you're around her, they're more conscious. And you have words for them because you've actually practiced talking through them in therapy. I mean, now you're going to be much more likely to not only communicate, but communicate in a healthier way. Um, yeah, it seems a little blasé to say all you have to do is just address your issues in therapy, but that's very difficult to do. And it usually takes like 4 or 5 sessions to at least get people to start talking through their issues in a healthy way. I mean, it's really painful. It takes a while. It's like on the one hand, it seems obvious, yet it's difficult for some reason. It's not easy to do. It is simple, and you will be able to do it more and more, but it's not easy to do. And even after that, I mean, even journaling and writing through these things, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. I don't want to be dismissive and say, "Oh, this is all you have to do to grow, and if you do this, then you'll just." It's not that. This is a challenge. This is very difficult work. If you probably go through it fully, it's going to be the most difficult thing you ever do. Um, because of that. Because of that, let's just focus on the working mechanisms that actually matter and not anything else. That's why it's even more important because it's going to be difficult enough for you to just sit down and journal like 100 words through this new feeling that came up when your grandmother's or when your mother-in-law, whatever, said something and triggered you. Right.
Yeah, so that's very personally interesting to me because I think one of the things that I struggled with when I first came across some of your work was, you said something along the lines, and I think I saw you say this on Twitter. You're like, well, awareness leads to change. Awareness creates change. If you're still struggling to change, then it's because you lack awareness. And
Yeah.
once you get that awareness, the change starts to happen automatically because the behavior that you're struggling with is just a function of lack of awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, most people, I mean, because of therapy culture and validation therapy, I would blame. Um, because yeah, I mean, most people think that awareness is complaining about your mom being a narcissist, right? It's like that's not awareness.
Well, I think
Right.
where I initially got tripped up was I thought, well, I am aware, but I was aware of my payoff. I was aware of that behavior. I wasn't
Hmm.
aware of the underlying issue. And I was like, well, but I'm aware and I still struggle. But I wasn't aware of the deeper issue. And I think that's where I got tripped up. And I think some people uh, might also, just based on a different understanding of therapy and what you're doing in therapy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I do make several jumps that I don't really think about. And that may be one of them. But yeah, I mean, it's actually very difficult to um, write down. I mean, most people can't even do it who have a problem with their mother-in-law. You can't write down in 100 words like what you want to say to her and how you could say it in a way that would actually create a better relationship. You just don't have the vocabulary to do that. And it takes several sessions to get there, honestly. And yeah, yeah, anyway, sorry. I was going to go off on a tangent, but I'm going to try to restrain myself.
I
Hey,
feel like
tangents
tangents are encouraged. Yeah.
tangents can be juicy. I mean, it's great. I can really clip a good tangent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, sometimes they're good, but sometimes they're stupid, and I just have to like, is this going to be a good one? I don't know. What was it about?
I have to stop myself from talking about random history things because I will
Yeah,
explain like, a whole historical period to make one point. Take some
yeah.
self-control.
It was just going to be a tangent about getting lost in the symptom, getting distracted by it, and just complaining about your mother-in-law or whoever over and over again. And just, that is such a dead end. I mean,
Hmm.
I think that's where a lot of people who are disillusioned with therapy or with talking about your feelings, um, I think that's what they're noticing. They notice people just wallowing in the
yeah,
symptom.
yeah, that's the validation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
And
they're
then
like, well,
that's
this
that's
isn't
Abigail
helpful.
Schreier's point, is especially when you send teenagers in to do that. At a very vulnerable stage. I mean, you can really internalize a lot of really negative if you just go in there and complain about your mom. And it's so tricky. It's so tricky because everything you could be saying about your mom is right.
Hmm.
It is relevant. Or no, it is correct, but it's not relevant to you, you know? And that's very difficult thing for a lot of people to give up is like, yeah, you're right. Your mom is all these things, but that doesn't matter. Like, if this is a court of law, then fine. If this is a law school class, then fine. Bring up all those things, but this is therapy. It doesn't matter. What matters is your relationship with it, your relationship with the feeling states you have about it.
In fact, maybe because they're right, that's actually what makes it so
Oh,
much
oh, that
harder.
makes it even worse. Oh,
Yeah.
when you're right, because then, I mean, yeah, I mean, one of my rules for the group that I run is no politics. And people think, oh yeah, well, when people start arguing about politics, it's going to be a problem. Like, no, that actually would be fine. The problem is when people start agreeing. When people
Mm.
start agreeing and think, yeah, it really is Hillary, it really is Trump.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's when it just becomes. Well, the reason I have that rule is because I sat in and helped run a lot of groups, and it just evolved into. I mean, it was 2016, so it was 2016 in Manhattan, so everybody was just complaining about Trump.
Hmm.
And that was the 90 minutes. And I looked down and I'm like, what happened?
Hmm.
What was this? And it wasn't inexpensive either. It was not a cheap group.
I've had it before where therapists bring up politics, um, and they'll make like offhanded comments about, like Trump making things worse for me or something like that. Yeah, your face falling, which is like the appropriate reaction. I
I
hate it
mean,
when that happens.
yeah, yeah, firing squads. That's, that's when like they start to become, but yeah,
It's taking away
yeah,
the agency for me.
it's
Like I'm
really
I'm
bad.
here to
And
improve.
and why? Why do they talk about Trump? Because when they went to grad school, nobody laid out to them what is that therapy, what isn't it.
Mm.
Nobody distinguished that. Nobody had the
Well,
wherewithal to even begin to start that conversation, and that's what my work is about.
I wonder if it's also a matter of incentives. Like, they probably understand if they've been in therapy for, 20 years that they talk to clients and validate their feelings and kind of externalize the problem. Uh, I'm sure that gets good reviews. And I'm sure when ChatGPT acts as kind of like a mirror for one's most narcissistic tendencies, that keeps people engaged on the platform. And so. it seems to me like there's also misaligned incentives here, even if you do understand
Yeah, well,
fundamentally
I mean,
what's
that
going
could be a
on.
possibility, sure. I don't want to infer any negative motivations.
Yeah, yeah, I don't even think it's
I
intentional,
think it can just
probably.
be explained with you don't know what you're doing. You
Fair.
just don't know how to talk about this issue. That explains a lot of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's part. I mean, look, I've talked with psychologists and therapists who say, I just keep raising my rates until nobody wants to pay them.
Mm,
Because it's like you're just kind of, I mean, the implication is you just come in and complain.
mm,
And
mhm,
I'm fine to just let you complain, and I'm just gonna raise my rates until I can, make a certain amount of living. I've heard that. I mean, psychologists will say that point blank.
mm,
And it doesn't sound that controversial when they say it because nobody has a better plan. I mean, CBTs would say they have a better plan, but I mean, there's a lot of disagreement there, or at least argument to be had. But yeah,
So I do want to bring up CBT. And this is one of those things I think I can clip because I know a lot of people who love CBT, and I know it's considered by a lot of people to be sort of the gold standard. It's empirically validated. We have all these studies showing how effective it is.
yeah, that's true for every therapy, but okay, yeah,
Well, I want to talk about what is your opinion of CBT?
it's not therapy. I'm not saying cognitive behavioral therapy couldn't work or it's not helpful for some people, but it's not therapy. I mean, you're just dealing with the symptom of the issue. Um, I guess I should probably go into it more.
Well, what I'd like to see is a kind of a compare and contrast. So, what's someone doing in CBT, and why is that not therapy? And what are they doing in Darianite therapy? Uh, and I don't know if Darianite's the right term.
Yes,
I was in a group chat once of
correct therapy.
I was in a group chat once of fans of your work. We called ourselves the Dirtards. So maybe we could call it that. But I'd love to see a
Yeah.
compare and contrast.
Yeah, that's always a interesting one. I'm surprised more people haven't made fun of my last name by yeah, it starts with like der. Like, there's got to
Derp.
be something there. But well, I'm sorry. What was the question? Like, what's just the fundamental difference?
Yeah, yeah. Let's compare and contrast. Here's
Hmm.
CBT. Here's what you're doing in CBT. Here's what you're doing in your version of therapy.
uh Well, in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a CBT triangle, which is like the main framework that they use. There's thoughts, behaviors, emotions, right? And you change one by changing the other two. Well, what that fails to do is it fails to properly distinguish what the psychological issue is. You're just looking at the symptom of the issue. It's not that it's wrong. Nothing in cognitive behavioral therapy is wrong, but it just lacks proper resolution, right? I mean, just like the example that I said, a cognitive behavioral therapist, according to the theory. Now, look, I mean, some cognitive behavioral therapists out there may have enough intuition to know that this is wrong to do. And I totally get that. I'm just looking at the theory and what it prescribes. They would say, I mean, to the issue I talked about before. Oh, you're afraid to talk to women. Well, what you need to do is to, exposure therapy. Gradually expose yourself to the stimulus of women, and you will become more comfortable with it. And there, of course, is truth to that. But of course, the problem is it lacks resolution because, well, what if you're just not ready to talk to women? What if you don't even have the identity necessary to do something like that because of these issues with your parents, which I see all the time? Well, now you're going to have, it's like things are just going to be very difficult for you, and it's constantly going to feel like a struggle to do this thing. And I would argue that, well, yeah, that's because you haven't gotten nuanced about the needs, the healthy needs in this client's life. You aren't clear about that. So he comes to you with this problem and you deal with the problem without digging any deeper. And you have no framework for digging deeper. In fact, your framework is anti-deeper because it's just going around in a triangle saying, well, we'll just go to your behaviors and emotions. We'll just go to your thoughts. So that's the main issue. The main vertex, the vertice of the CBT triangle in the psychological context is emotions. And you need to get clear on what emotions are in order to establish that proper resolution. That's true of CBT. I would criticize any kind of therapy for that, though.
So basically, the cognitive behavioral therapist is looking at the symptom. Oh, I can't approach women. I'm terrified,
Hmm.
and saying, okay, and just taking that at face value and saying, okay, well, just expose yourself to it. You'll get comfortable with it, and then you'll be
Hmm.
fine. And what you're saying is, well, okay, you'll develop some more comfort with talking to women, maybe, but the reason that you struggle to talk to women is deeper. It's because of, let's say, some sort of relationship with your mother. You learn to manage your mother's anxiety growing up, and now you're doing the same with just women in general.
Yeah.
And what you need to do
Yes.
is you need to go back to that older relationship and talk through what's really going on there. And once you talk through that and you understand why do I have that issue and what's the healthy need under there, then your behavior with women is going to automatically start changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what did you need to do? Did you need to talk to more women? Not necessarily. You needed to talk to women in a certain way, while not, you're very reactive to their feelings. So as long as you're in that state of being reactive to their feelings, it's not going to go very well for you. You're going to feel drained. You're not going to get any success that you want. Um, yeah, but it comes through not getting concrete, not getting specific enough about what the issue is. Yeah, because somebody comes in and they say what their issue is, and you take it at face value, which of course psychodynamic therapists would say the same thing, but I just add the extra bit of, well, there's a definite way of making this fear around women's emotions. There's a way of making this conscious so it affects you less and less. And just submit to this process and it'll become more comfortable for you.
So you've got the CBT where it's systematic, but it's systematic at the level of symptoms
Hmm.
instead of at the level of the actual underlying cause. And then you
Right.
have the psychodynamic who is trying to get to the cause, but doesn't have a systematic way of dealing with the actual cause.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And look, I think a lot of some psychodynamic therapists could actually do a really good job. Even though they don't have a systematic way, I think they've done it enough and they're intuitive enough that they can do a very good job of this. But that's not teachable. That works well in a society of 250 people. That doesn't work well for this complex culture that we have now. There needs to be at least principles, and you don't have to stick to them exactly. You don't have to do them in this certain order, but we have to be aware that there's a way of going about this. So if you get stuck, you know what you're doing wrong, or you know that there's a way out of it. That's that's really what matters. I mean, it's like I mean, actually, kind of psychodynamic therapists really piss me off sometimes because I mean, I'm coded psychodynamic. That's would have been me if I wasn't as smart as I am, right? But what really pisses me off about psychodynamic therapists is they always say, "Well, everybody's different. Everybody's different." Well, when you say everybody's different, while at the same time we're in this mental health crisis, I mean, this epidemic, which I think the stats there are legitimate because just look at the suicide rates. That tells you what you need to know. You can't fake that. It's not like a reporting, oh, I feel more anxious. No, kids are killing themselves. Everybody's different, and teenagers killing themselves can't exist together. That doesn't work. You need to say, yes, everybody is different, but there's a way in which we're all the same and we're all addressing the same fundamental issue. And it really helps to notice that everybody's doing the same thing so we can do it together. So we can realize that it's not your issue, but an issue you have. And when you say everybody's different, that sounds really smart and like, ooh, like, but it's it's a covering up of the fact that you haven't really thought clearly about, what psychology is and what emotions are.
I think we could call that more of a concrete bound mentality as opposed to a conceptualization. So they haven't conceptualized.
Yeah, yeah, having conceptualized. Well, yeah, I mean, I think psychodynamic, and Jung noticed this, because Freud's the father of psychoanalysis, and he's an empiricist. I mean, Freud or Jung's an empiricist too. He often gets criticized for not being, but yeah, it's typically it would attract people who are more empirical in their methodology. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's another point, another thing that attracted me to your work, which is I had been through therapy. I'd been to one therapist for like 2 years straight. And I would go in and I would talk to him. And th there's some benefit in just having someone to talk to. But I remember getting to the end of 2 years and thinking, what have I actually learned here? And I was like, not much. I mean, I haven't, I feel like I'm more or less where I was 2 years ago, and I've spent hours and hours talking, and I just don't feel like I'm really gotten anywhere at all. I feel like there's just basically a waste. And, when I was reading your work and you said, well, everyone is fundamentally the same. We all have the same fundamental human nature, which means you can develop fundamental principles of the field. And that was so different from what I experienced with this therapist, where it was just like, okay, let's try this. All right, let's try that. All right,
yeah,
let's and I don't know how many different methodologies or techniques we went through, but it was a lot of different techniques. And but there was never the question of like, okay, why would we do this technique? It was just like, well, let's try this because this didn't work. All right, this didn't work. Let's try that. And there was never a question of like, okay, well, what are the fundamental principles here? It was just like, well, everyone's different and everyone responds to different things. And when I read your work and you were like, well, no, yes, everyone is different because we're all individuals, but we all possess the same fundamental human nature, which means there are principles that we can build a proper therapy off of.
yeah. But by the way, which is something that psychology recognizes. I mean, there's evolutionary psychology. We realize, oh, look, there's analogous parts in our elbows. There's analogous parts in our brains. Like there's a part of us that's a whale, right? It's not just the elbow, it's our brain. So there's generalization, but I would say that's it, a lot of it's overfitting, right? It's using these concepts, but not really getting clear about them and how they really grounded in reality. So yeah, like that stuff happens all the time. And the other thing though is well, I guess what I'm saying is not like, yeah, psychologists try to conceptualize, they're just not great at it. Like I say, I mean, it's kind of glib, but it's true. I mean, most of them were just English majors. They didn't know what else to do, and they don't know how to think philosophically. And this is a field that is you know, just famished for some kind of philosophy and grounded principles. Yeah, the other thing about that, I mean, yeah, don't even get me started. I mean, just the fact that, yeah, a lot of people have that experience that you have. I go to therapy for 2 years and I just talk, and I guess it's better than doing nothing. And it might be, and that's fine. But where is this going? That never gets brought up in school. Nobody ever talks about that. It's just you don't bring it up. And I think they're just trapped in their own little bubble. Actually, thinking of the problem with symptoms goes back to the transgender thing because, a lot of 13, 14-year-old kids come into the clinic and they have this symptom, this problem. Like, I feel like I'm the different gender and they just lack because, you know, I just think because you're unable to differentiate and know how to talk with people beyond just their symptom that they present, you can't delve into it and get more specific and you don't know how. And obviously, the politics around the trans thing, you don't want to like offend anybody or so it just makes it, yeah. That's just something I was thinking about when I was in the
Okay.
bathroom
Yeah, well, I
thought.
think also I mean, it's really hard, right? And you're dealing with young kids who don't necessarily have a lot of introspective ability. And it probably takes like a pretty experienced psychologist to like get a kid there. I'm thinking about myself when I was younger. I was going to therapy at 14 or so when I came out. And I think it would have taken a really exceptional therapist to like get to underlying motivations for a transition that didn't have to do with like the sort of generic narrative, which is also, present in there. So, yeah, I wonder how much of the issue is just like psychology is really complicated. And there's so much more demand for good psychology and good therapy than there are people that can actually provide that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my way of dealing with that, if somebody is confused about their sexuality, whether it's trans or homosexual or whatever, it's just like, we'll just put that on the back burner. That will become clear as you begin to process these issues. And then you tell me what your sexuality is.
Mm.
Your sexuality takes a long time to develop. It's not easy. There's a lot of pain and fear and rejection. And if there's a younger person coming to me confused about their sexuality, it's like, okay, yeah, we'll get to that. You tell me what comes up for you, but really what we're working on is these deeper issues that are going to clear up that issue for you eventually.
So curious also about Connor. You dealt a lot with OCD issues and CBT wasn't super helpful for it. Were you ultimately able to find deeper psychological causes of those OCD issues and address them at the root? Or how did you end up working through that?
Well, so I basically most of the OCD stuff that I had as a kid um, just evaporated for the most
Mm,
part when I went through adolescence. Because when I was young, I think I was 8 years old when I was officially diagnosed, and it was really bad.
mm,
I had the classic hand washing, and it was really really bad. And I ended up going to a therapist where we were in Philadelphia, who was like a nationally recognized authority on the subject, and her preferred method was cognitive behavioral therapy, and and uh, my brother also had it. Very
mm.
not he had a different manifestation of it, but it was OCD. And so we both went to this, uh, and he seemed to respond much better than I did. Um, I really did not. I did not respond very well to it at all. I don't feel like I really made much progress at all. In fact, I think at the end of it, if I'm remembering correctly, the therapist was just like, I don't think I can really, I don't think I can really help here. And we just ended it. And and then, like I said, when I was 13 or 14, and I was homeschooled at the time, and then I went to a high school, private, Catholic school, um, and it just mostly went away on its own. It just mostly disappeared. Um, Not entirely. There were still some symptoms, but mostly it just evaporated. Um, and it
Spending less time at home. Is that?
I think that was a big part of it. I think that was a
Yeah.
big part of
Mm.
it. I mean, and I've talked a little bit about my homeschooling experience. Maybe I should talk more about this in another episode because I know people have lots of opinions on this. But just getting out of the house and getting outside of the family system, and all of a sudden, a lot of that just went away.
Mm.
So I'd be curious to get your opinion on that, Mark. It sounds like you have maybe some theories, some
Well,
speculation.
that sounds like it wasn't a psychological issue then. I mean, in a broad sense, maybe it was, but if all you had to do was be around peers, just like a normal lifestyle intervention, I mean, that's not a psychological issue, right?
Ah, that's an interesting
I
analysis.
mean, if it all just went away because of that and it took no further, I mean, it's like somebody who's depressed, just to maybe add more flavor, another layer to this. Like you want them to live in a way that's as healthy as possible, as healthy as they're able to stand on their own. And if reading somebody's tweet online that says like, "Oh, you got to go to the sauna more," if that helps, then okay, that helps. And then maybe you don't need any treatment. But if you do all these things and you're still depressed, then there's an issue there. And it sounds like in your case, you were just responding to being inside all day or not leaving or not making friends or not being around enough different people.
Yeah, well, I think I'm not sure what you mean when you say it's not a psychological issue,
Yeah.
because I think the way I might describe it is I was the OCD symptoms were uh, were some sort of way of dealing with
Yeah,
the
you're right. I misspoke. I was trying to be glib. It is a psychological issue. You just don't need therapy.
Mm.
right. Well, I think it was probably a way of dealing with the unhealthy environment that I was in.
Yeah. Well, I
Mm.
mean, unless you want to talk more about your home environment. I don't know. Like, maybe was it really dirty or something? You felt like you had to wash your hands a lot, or
No, no, it wasn't like that. Yeah, I don't know that I want to go too deep into that right now. Um, but for me, it was just it's an example of well, CBT was not an effective intervention, and I remember what was the way it was described to me at the time was like, oh well, you just expose yourself, you don't wash your hands, and yeah, the anxiety is going to come up, but you just have to sit with the anxiety, and eventually it'll go
yeah,
away,
yeah.
and there was also sort of like a moral judgment placed on me that I didn't respond to it. Oh well, you're just not cooperative. You're just not doing this right.
And she doesn't want to place a moral judgment on you. I'm sure she's written plenty of theses in college on how moral judgment in therapy is wrong. But if your ideology leads there, if it comes down to something you're doing or not doing like that, then it's inevitable.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's easy to talk about no moral judgment in therapy. But unless you really understand emotions and why people do things, then it's,
yeah. Well, I don't recall the moral judgment coming from her. It came more from my
oh, I thought that's
parents.
what you said.
No, it came more from
Mm.
my parents. Who were
Ah,
they're these very devout Catholics. So moral judgment is just part of the
I'm just,
atmosphere you
I'm
grew
just
up
like
in.
chomping at the bit here to rip on CBTs.
Yeah.
But you do find that in CBTs. I mean,
Mm.
my
Yeah,
point still stands. Maybe not in that instance, but
yeah.
but it must. I mean, oh well, you're just not doing it hard enough. When
Yeah.
it's symptom management, the problem it just comes down to attack the symptom, and you have to do it hard enough or care enough. And maybe that's true in some sense, but it's your job as a therapist. Well, how do I care? How do I do it harder? You have to show me how. How do I get there? And if it's just telling me isn't working, then you need a different approach. You need an approach that I can engage with on my own time for the rest of my life. Really, that would be ideal.
Mm. Well, on that note, I think there's some research showing connections between disgust response and religiosity, as well as xenophobia and a number of other factors. But it seems like there probably is reason to think that the part of the brain that's like super concerned about bad odors or smells or foreign contact with, you know, parasites or, bacteria also has some influence on people's religiosity. So, you can always like speculate on these things, but I can certainly imagine that growing up in a super religious household, you're activating that part of the brain all the time. And so maybe
Yeah.
also getting away from that, there's something psychological that frees you up there. It seems like when problems can be solved through changing the environment or just through like gaining a new piece of information, for example, learning about metaphysics or learning about the way that people approach truth or morality, it seems like you are looking at that and you're saying, well, in that case, it's not a psychological issue. What you mean by that is maybe not that it doesn't have anything to do with the brain, but
Hmm.
that it doesn't require therapy for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it seems like what I'm getting from you is that you have like a definition of therapy, which is therapy is something which is addressing problems in a very specific way. And I wonder, I mean, it feels a little bit like tautological to me, right? Where if we define therapy that way, then of course the only way to do therapy properly is as you've defined it. But other people will talk about therapy and they'll use the word therapy to include things like um, identifying the environment, which might be an issue, and trying to get someone out of it, right? Which is the physical change that maybe would have helped Connor with his OCD. Or looking at someone and saying, what you need is these metaphysical principles, and then just sort of like through dialogue, expressing those principles, communicating that to someone. Seems like people use the term therapy to describe all sorts of behaviors, and those things can have positive psychological effects. So it seems to me like not so crazy if someone were to say, well, you can really practice therapy in all sorts of different ways and have positive psychological effects, which are outside of your paradigm, which maybe you acknowledge can have positive benefits, but you just wouldn't call therapy. I wonder um, how much of your issue with the therapeutic landscape has to do with actually seeing people's approaches as negative or harmful, or maybe just seeing them as not therapy, right? Kind of definitionally.
Yeah, I mean, there's no problem talking about metaphysics in the therapeutic clinic. That the problem is what's the recourse if that doesn't work?
Mhm. Well, I
That's
mean, you
the
could try
issue.
like, I guess
Talk about metaphysics more.
simultaneously.
Yeah.
I guess like with Connor's situation, um, I can imagine like you try to engage with him on the level of therapy that you've discussed thus far, looking for those fundamental root issues. And maybe that doesn't help because all he really needs to do is get into a different environment. Um, so I wonder if someone could say the same thing about your approach and say, like, well, if your approach doesn't work, they just need to try my approach. Is there room in therapy for a kind of multimodal approach where you are trying different things with different patients depending on the situation as you've
Yeah, of
analyzed it?
course. But there's no confusion. Like if an 8-year-old's in the wrong environment, there's no confusion about what to do with that.
Well, it sounds like there was, right? Because Connor went to therapy and it wasn't clear what would help him necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I think my therapy, I mean, in Connor's situation, it would have necessarily led to how to interact with your environment in a healthier way, which gets you out of the environment in itself, even if you are still technically there. I mean, it would be a little bit different with an 8-year-old. I mean, I wouldn't even work with an 8-year-old. That's not I wouldn't do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're right. And sometimes you just have to move out of your parents' basement.
Mhm.
But I find, when people come to therapy, they've known for years that they need to move out of their parents' basement. That's not the issue. The issue is why can't I? Or why can't I get the motivation to do it? Or when I go to look at apartments on Craigslist, I just get distracted by Twitter. That's the huge dark spot. That's the question mark. I mean, yeah, that other kind of therapy, and that can be really helpful, but and if that works, then great. That's all the therapy needs to be. But I think the thing that really matters is you need recourse for if that doesn't work. Like, what's the recourse for Connor when he goes into a new environment and he still has obsessive compulsive issues? Okay, so it wasn't the environment; it was something else. And I know what that something else is on an abstract level. It's engaging with, your emotions in a healthier way.
I think the distinction that we might be looking for here is between psychology and therapy, where it's it's a psychological question. Well, okay, why do you have this issue? But the answer might not be therapy, because therapy is, as we've discussed earlier on, is about there's an unconscious issue which is preventing you from making a decision, or it's there's an unconscious issue that's causing behavior that you're trying to stop doing. Um, and in the case of, if we go back to my case, it might be, well, there is an unconscious issue that's causing this behavior, but all that really needs to happen is a different environment. And so therapy is not, and so psychology would determine that, and then therapy would not be the intervention. It would just be a different environment. That's all you need.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And if that doesn't work, I mean, just from my perspective, when people finally decide to get to, I mean, maybe you guys are in, I don't know, socioeconomic, whatever, where people, go to therapy all the time. But from my perspective, it usually takes a lot for people to start therapy. And they have to feel really stuck. And they've already tried several things and they've tried different environments and they've moved different cities. And it's like, I broke up with this one girl because she was toxic, and then I'm dating this other girl and she's just as toxic. Like, what's going on? And so there needs to be a different approach. But I mean, to what you're saying, Taff, like I mean, that's true, but there's just no confusion in the field around that. And if that was the only problem, then there wouldn't be a mental health epidemic. It's, well, what do you do when that doesn't work? When you try to change the environment and things like that. So that's the real issue.
And that is people not fundamentally getting to the emotions.
Yeah, people not yeah, not talking through and developing the healthiest relationship possible with their feelings. With their feelings that they're acting out because they can't put it to words properly and integrate it into their lives and communicate it to people around them, starting with the therapist in the clinic.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that definitely leads us back, I think, nicely to where we started with the conversation as well, discussing, what is the fundamental issue? What is therapy? What are people missing? The emotional
Mhm.
analysis.
Yeah, right. I mean, it really is that simple and it really is that difficult. This really does come down to putting words to how you feel. And I just want to give people the syntax and the vocabulary and a way of doing that, just to practice. And then you can start doing it on your own and you'll realize like these areas in your life that you just didn't have an identity or a personality for, like your mother-in-law. Why is your mother-in-law so difficult? You don't have a personality for dealing with people like that. Develop a personality. And the reason why is because there's all these stuffed away issues that you don't know how to process. You don't know how to integrate into your life. That's really what it is. And I want to give people a way of doing that so we can at least take the guesswork out of it. It's still going to be painful. You're still going to cry and feel like a pussy and all that stuff. So because all that happens, you need a clear way of knowing exactly what you're doing. Um, and even with that,
Yeah,
like I'm saying, even with that, it sucks. So if when you don't know what you're doing, it's just a total mess. And you just killing yourself makes total sense. That's the thing. When people don't understand about suicide, like it very good idea, from a certain perspective. And if you can't see that and relate with it, we have no chance of working through, this issue as a culture.
Mm.
well, as a marketer, I love that clip. I'm going to cut that and put that on shorts. Just suicide is a great idea.
I mean, yeah. I mean, when you have psychological issues and you've been to therapy for years, I mean, like kind of you said you went for a couple of years and didn't do anything. I mean, if you had a real, it doesn't sound like you had a pressing issue, but if you had a real pressing issue and that's what came out of it, I mean, it would make sense you want to kill yourself. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think. I mean that's part of the problem with therapy, and I could complain about it a lot. But you talk to most therapists, and they just seem to like, oh well, what's the problem with therapy? Like, do we have our act together? Yeah, we just need more people in therapy, or we just need more therapists, or we need more government grants for therapy so everybody can get free therapy, and they don't realize what they're doing and what the field lacks. And it's just really obvious when you go into a graduate program because this needs to be the first thing that people talk about. Somebody's tried all this therapy. Somebody's done everything. They've moved. They tried all these self-help things. They read all these books. And then they went to a therapist who was nationally renowned and wrote all these books, and nothing worked. What do you do? Where's the recourse for that? And that's just, nobody, nobody. I mean, nobody has the intellectual teeth to dig through. It's not that they're trying to avoid it. You just don't understand how to talk through stuff like that. So that's what I want to help the field to see. So
Okay. Okay, well, I think we should go ahead and wrap up there. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. It's definitely clarified some things for me. Um, if for viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe. Or if you don't want to subscribe, if you disagree with everything we've said, let us know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Mark would love to hear from you. And
I'll be tracking those. Yeah.
yeah.